is a production of DallasCowboys.com and the Dallas Cowboys Football Club.
How about them Cowboys?
This is Radioheads. Broadcasting live on DallasCowboys.com and the official Dallas Cowboys app. Now, your hosts, Tyler Klutz, Christy Scales, and Brad Sham.
I'm Cowboys Sideline reporter Christy Scales here with Tyler Klutz. We wish a happy new year to Brad Sham, who he'll be back at work after sundown tonight and helping with the Cowboys Hour. But happy new year, Brad. And I think, Tyler, that we need to rename today's show instead of Radioheads. Whenever the Cowboys come out on the losing end, you know, we've got an autopsy we have to do. And so maybe we should call this CSI New Orleans after what happened.
That,
But what was your biggest takeaway from the 12-10 loss last night?
So I think the biggest takeaway is don't panic. I think after a loss, you know, everyone just is so quick to say, oh, the season's going down the drain. Kellen Moore is an awful offense coordinator. Dak can't throw the ball. Our offensive line's no good. I mean, everybody, all the things under the moon people are saying now because we lost a game to a really good team. But I would say this, my biggest disappointment would probably be with the offensive line and protection. Uncharacteristic of those guys. I think that we had more trouble with the games that they were running on their defensive line up front. Things that you would see Zach Martin pick up 100 out of 100 times. There was a couple that he'd missed. And again, we don't know all of the ins and outs and what calls were made and who was supposed to do what. But as a spectator and kind of understanding that blocking scheme that they do, there were some things that was just uncharacteristic of that unit.
Well, that's what makes football so great. It's the ultimate team sport. But all it takes is just one misstep or one little bit of a breakdown for the whole play to collapse. But funny, some of the things you mentioned about Kellen Moore and about Dak and the run game. We already have some questions that we're going to address, but we invite everyone to call in, or you can tweet us your questions. The phone number is 888-855-2297. That's 888-855-2297. And producer Caden Gates is going to help us field those calls. And again, we'll be monitoring Twitter. But let's see. We have a question. You talked about offensive line, and a question sent in. This is Carrie from Columbus, Ohio. Are we sunk without Tyron Smith? How bad is his ankle injury? How long will he be out? First of all, Carrie, the good news, sort of good news, it is the early reports, it's a high ankle sprain.
Yeah, that's good.
But there are degrees of high ankle sprains, and so hopefully this is one that is not several weeks. It may be shorter than that. But, Tyler, are we sunk without Tyron Smith, or Cam Fleming a luxury to have in there?
So losing Tyron, that hurts. I mean, you can't replace an all-pro tackle like that. So to say that we're going to continue on and we're going to skip without skipping a beat, I think that's being a little naive. Now, what I did like is, although it took Cameron a little bit to adjust when he came in, that he got Dak hit from the backside, you know, pretty solid on one of the plays. But it's really hard to go from 0 to 100 like that. And so you've got to always be ready to go in the game. You've always got to be ready to execute. But he did a very good job for being thrown in at that point in the game. Now,
Because this was the final drive and backed up near your own end zone and having to go probably about 50, 60 yards to get in field goal range.
That's exactly right.
And they're teeing off on you, the
teeing off,
end.
and in an atmosphere that we'll talk about later. There's another question that was brought up about this, but the atmosphere there was crazy. Absolutely. And you were there, right? And the Superdome is a venue that is really hard to play in as a visitor, especially when it's a 2-minute drive to go down and win the game. Yeah. And so I think that he did a good job. You know, we've lost him in the past. We've had the Atlanta game that we were notoriously
oh my goodness, that's
missing.
Etched in our memory.
But I think, you know, Mark Colombo is going to do a great job getting those guys ready no matter what. You know, Cameron Fleming on the left side is a very, very capable backup tackle, and he's going to come in and he's going to play hard. I mean, we've got to do some things. I think Kellen is flexible enough in his play calling that he can do some things to help him. Unlike what happened in the situation when Tyron was out against Atlanta, you know, there was no back help from from Zeke to Chip or tight ends left in to help, you know, on those speed rushes. And so Kellen is going to, I know, and I have faith that he's going to do a good job calling calls that are going to help Cameron be as successful as possible. But again, he's got a big responsibility and big shoes, literally, to fill in at that left side and to protect Dak and to give him time, because I think we saw last night that was more pressure than he's been used to seeing all year, and it had an effect.
It did. And the thing about Cam Fleming, starter for the Patriots, now albeit at right tackle, not left tackle, but starter in the Super Bowl. And so a lot of playing experience. But here's the thing, Tyler, it's the domino effect of these injuries. And there's another one I want to talk about in a bit with Kayvon Frazier. And you say, Kayvon Frazier, backup safety, what does that have to do with anything? Well, it has a big thing to do with special teams and special teams coverage. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen if Tyron, even if he only misses a couple or a few games, if that, we don't know yet. We're going to get an update later today from Coach Garrett, and then the media will be in the locker room, and maybe we'll find out more by the evening. But Cameron Fleming is the only tackle that has been available on game day as the backup. The only other backup tackle who's been inactive the first 4 games is an undrafted rookie free agent from Indiana named Brandon Knight. Now, Brandon played tackle in college, but about halfway through training camp, they thought, let's give him some position flex. We think he can be a good guard. So he was actually moved to guard in training camp and played most of his snaps in the preseason games at guard. So now your swing tackle going into next week against Green Bay, who has a good defense, at least the first few games, is a guy who's an undrafted rookie free agent who's been getting most of his practice reps at guard. And then the only other offensive tackle is on the practice squad, Mitch Hyatt, who was a team captain for the national champions at Clemson, but he was getting pushed around in preseason. And I don't think you want to make a roster move to move him up to the 53-man, because then you'd have to make a corresponding move. But hey, let's see. You had you mentioned there was a question about the Superdome.
Yes, let's go to that. So Nikki in Garland, Texas, says, how does the crowd noise in the Superdome compared to other indoor stadiums? How big of a home field advantage do the Saints really have? So this was my 3rd game in the NFL. I was playing for the Chicago Bears at the time, and obviously had watched a lot of football and watched games at the Superdome, but I was not prepared. Everyone said it's loud here, it's electric, it's dark. It's really it's an eerie feeling inside the Superdome because there's no natural light.
It's cavernous.
Yes,
and even the seats are like darker colors and stuff. So all that is muted, and then there, like you say, no natural light. It's kind of creepy, actually.
And it really is, because the lights are so focused on the field, and then it's almost like stage lights where you don't see the audience. And so, but it is probably one of the loudest NFL venues overall that I've played in, and multiple times too. We played there in 2015. I played there in 2013 with the Dolphins. Every time we play there, it's electric, and they get wild in New Orleans, and they have a great time. So I'm not big on home field advantage. I'm not big on building in excuses, but it is a challenge. And if you were out here at practice at all this week, they were pumping in the crowd noise like crazy.
From your office, you could probably hear it all the way across the Star.
Absolutely. But that's necessary. And I think from an operational standpoint, we did well. Dak managed the 2-minute drill as well as possible. We weren't effective as like what we would like to be, but they did a good job in preparing for it, but that noise is real. So, Nikki, it is a very real thing there in the Superdome. They're not bad fans. They're not like Eagles fans. So they're at least friendly. They're having a good time.
Whenever they send the Cowboys to New Orleans to play the Saints, inevitably it's a primetime matchup, which means that those fans are well lubricated by the time 7:20 kickoff rolls around. Not that they need any help.
Those hand grenades start at noon there. So
Did you see the social media of Jerry Jones basically leading a parade down Bourbon Street on Saturday night?
I did not.
Well, it was Jerry Jr.'s birthday weekend.
Yes, I heard that.
In New Orleans. So the Jones boys in New Orleans were birthday weekend. But actually, so they had left the restaurant and they were headed over to Pato's. And there were so many Cowboy fans. I was at Pato's. Our radio crew was there a little earlier in the evening, not quite so late. But there were so many Cowboys fans in the French Quarter. And all of them happened to be out there at exactly the time that Jerry came out and was walking. And I mean, he was like the Pied Piper going down Bourbon Street. But it was actually very cool. And there were a lot of Cowboys fans in the stands last night. It's just that they didn't really have much to cheer for, so that wasn't as and it was as you would think.
You know, I think going into the week we were anticipating it being a slugfest. We thought it was going to be a high scoring slugfest just with the two offenses and how it's been, you know, the previous weeks. Obviously with Bridgewater and his tendency to kind of dink and dunk and a lot of short passes. But I think we had high hopes that the momentum of this offense would continue, and it wasn't the case. So I think as fans, we were deflated, you know, from the very beginning, right? And it was just kind of a slow game, a lot of field goals, a lot of red zone attempts that we didn't convert, and so it was hard, but it was not what we thought it would look like, but it was what we anticipated in it being a really tough game.
Well, let's break it down a little more. And like you said at the beginning, what they were doing with the Saints front and running a lot of gains and things, stunts and things like that. Were they doing that on the runs? And is that one reason why it was so difficult to establish the run? Or was that mainly in the pass
Yeah,
game?
so they did a great job of giving a lot of different looks. They loaded the box up. And everyone does that against us because they know that Jason Garrett is going to say, I don't care how many people you put in the box, we're going to impose our will, we're going to run the ball, which as a fullback, I loved that. But what they did is they gave a lot of different looks, and they had a lot of pinching, and they would bring the safeties down to fill those
see
those
it right
runs.
there on that play as Zeke's trying to get around the right side, just impossible to do it.
And so even when 11 personnel, which 11 personnel is one tight end, one running back, and gun, they would still even bring 5 to 6 guys up onto the line to disguise who's going where, who's doing what.
5 guys around him on that play previously.
Exactly. And so even if they're only rushing 3, they're still giving the illusion that, okay, hey, you've got to account for all 6 of us, which gets Zeke out of the backfield later because he's got to make sure, okay, hey, my responsibility is generally the Mike or the Will. I've got to make sure he doesn't rush before I take off and get into my route. So slows him out. So, you know, that outlet, you see Zeke right there, stay in.
Stayed in, but the guys came from the left side and forced the errant pass there.
So they gave a lot of different looks. They ran a lot of twist games. So where the defensive tackle, the defensive end, they're looping around. They were doing a lot of different things. Like I said, bringing linebackers up, pulling them out, bringing some. It was just a lot going on. And the Saints are notorious for that. Back when Rob Ryan was there. They did a lot of that crazy stuff, and so they did a good job confusing us up front and really keeping Zeke as much out of the pass game as they could.
Well, speaking of the pass game, Amari Cooper, the 2 offensive pass interference penalties. But I'll tell you where my disappointment was in this game, just talking with some staffers on the bench, literally 45 minutes before kickoff. They had identified Eli Apple, the cornerback that plays opposite Lattimore, as the one to go after.
Yeah.
As a lot of offenses in the NFL do. So they knew that Lattimore was going to follow Cooper wherever he went, and that's what happened. They still rolled some help to help Lattimore with Cooper. But this is a thing, boy, too bad Michael Gallup was injured. I thought that Devin Smith might be in for a big night because if he was getting one-on-one with Eli Apple, then go for that. But he was targeted once, 0 receptions. He did draw a defensive holding penalty that resulted in a first down on a third down pass attempt. So, I don't know if it's that Devin wasn't winning some of his one-on-one or if, again, I think it was more the pass pressure and Dak just not having time to throw.
Yeah, and I think that's a combination of all of that. I think that Dak didn't have time to get back to him. You've got to be really careful, and Devin's a good receiver, but you've got to be very careful directing your quarterback to say, okay, hey, we're going to him right now. It's a one-on-one. We're hitting it regardless, right? Because that's a lot of trust, right? That's what the Dez's, the Amari's like, okay, I'm going to hit you. I know you're going to win, and I'm going to have trust, so my eyes are going to go to you right away. With a young guy like that, it's hard to say that because now your only other option is to check it down to your back, which we just talked about, which was staying in protection a lot of the night. So I agree with you. It's hard to do that. It's hard to take your progression from Amari to Witt to Zeke and then back to Devin.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot to ask when you're getting pressured, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, the last couple of weeks he probably could have done that. But I think Amari, I don't think he was 100%, to be honest with you.
He didn't, he had the MRI on his ankle. I
Yeah.
believe that was last Wednesday.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to tell from field level sometimes.
Yeah.
But I don't know if maybe the cuts,
He
when
was-
he's breaking on his route, was it the route running?
Yeah. So just watching on TV, it was not. And the reason I say that is you can tell when you start to use your hands, that's when you don't trust your feet as much.
You
And
mean
so
hands in terms of
hands
pushing off?
Yeah. And, the calls were suspect. It really wasn't. I mean, it was like a shoulder one time. It was an elbow another time. And it could be just that's the body motion you make when you cut. So it was suspect there. But you could tell he was using his hands more than he normally does. Usually he doesn't. I mean, guys don't even get their hands on him.
Doesn't have to.
And he's so quick. So I would say he was a half step slower than I think we're used to seeing him as. So that did not help. And then Marcus Lattimore, he's been like the worst corner in the league over the year. So why would we not attack that? And of course he escalates his play
Sure.
and has a great
Sure.
game and really keeps Amari really quiet. So it's a tough deal when you've got all that in the case, and then we put the ball on the ground twice. That's
Yes.
a tough deal.
Yeah, and when Jason Witten, who hasn't fumbled since 2010, loses a fumble, guy came from behind, and I appreciated what he said after the game in the post-game locker room. It's like you don't have to watch out for the guys who are coming at you. And here's the play right here. You can see the linebacker comes from behind and strips it away. It's recovered by Von Bell. He says it's the ones you don't see that you have to worry about. But it's like we got some voodoo going on in the Crescent City when Jason Witten. And then Zeke, he's had over 1,400 touches in his career. That would be combined. I'm sorry, it's more than that. It's like, I have it written down, but all of the touches in his career, he has only 13 fumbles. Not all of those mean lost fumbles,
right.
But he's one of the most reliable runners and pass catchers in the league when it comes to that. But, I'll tell you that the Cowboys were sure that they were going to get the ball back, that it was going to be overturned because the offense had gone back on the field.
I was watching it. I was like, okay, cool. And I stopped paying attention to it. And then they had the ball. And I was like, wait, hold on. What happened? And then they were explaining it on the TV copy. But for them to say the ball is moving out, like the ball was not loose. His arm was moving. The ball was not loose. So to me, it blows my mind. They just... when New York calls in and they're analyzing this and they're analyzing that, I just don't see how they made that call. And listen, I'm the last person that wants to argue about a bad call and say, oh, they screwed us or they did this, or they did that. But that was a bad call. Yeah. The arm was moving, the ball was as tight as could be, and you saw his hand actually like shake when the ball actually came loose. Like it was very, very clear.
Well, the video, the replay that Caden, thank you for showing those, Caden. You can see it was from the angle that was from the north end zone. Honestly, from the sideline, when Zeke disappears into the pile, you couldn't tell whether he was down or not from the sideline. Mm-hmm. We couldn't really tell. But on the replay that was shown inside the Superdome, it was from the opposite end zone. Mm-hmm. And from that, it seemed very clear that his arm was down, and even the Saints fans, they're like, because they're like, hey, and then one. And then that was very disappointing. But for all of those fans who think that Jason Garrett, and yes, sometimes he is robotic in his press conferences, but if you think he's some, withering willow or something, let me tell you, he can get spicy on the sideline. And I have never seen him as angry with an officiating crew as he was at the end of the first half. And I think it was so Zeke fumbles just with a minute and a half to play. The Saints take the ball, they march it down, they get to the 1 yard line. There's 4 seconds left on the clock. Teddy Bridgewater throws an incomplete pass, which miraculously took only 2 seconds and allowed Will Lutz, the Saints kicker, time to come on and put the score to 9-3 at halftime and give the Saints a 6-point lead. Boy, I tell you, the Cowboys sideline was irate about that. How did that only take 2 seconds? Can you explain the rule in terms of a ball traveling out of bounds?
So
on a pass.
The clock is going to run from snap. And the clock was running at the time, but until the ball not just crosses the out of bounds, but hits something out of bounds. So whether it's a sound guy with the big bowl or it's the ground, it has to hit something out of bounds for the clock to stop. And so it's funny to me because, I mean, when a quarterback spikes the ball, sometimes they run 2 seconds off of it.
Yes, when it should be like maybe 1 second. I mean, it's literally.
That's exactly right. Let alone take a snap, take a one-step drop back, and then throw a back shoulder throw, and then it goes all the way out of bounds, and it lands 15 yards out of bounds.
It nearly hit the wall, and there's a lot of space in the Superdome behind the sidelines.
So best I could see on TV was that the clock was stopped just shortly after it went out of bounds, before it hit the ground. Now, would there have been a second left on the clock and enough time to get a snap? Maybe.
But 2 seconds,
but
there's
2 seconds,
no way.
And that's why Coach Garrett, and I'm glad you said that about Coach Garrett, because when people say, "Oh, he's robotic, he doesn't have any emotion,"
he's not. They don't know him.
Complete opposite. He's very coordinated, and he's very composed. And so for him, and people are always like, "Oh, well, he doesn't have any emotion. He doesn't care." No, he cares so much that he makes sure when he has the opportunity to speak to the press or the fans, he is very collected. He thinks his thoughts through, but by no means is he unemotional.
Yeah.
He cares about this team, this organization, this city more than anybody that I know.
Absolutely.
And so, and I have a hard time, and being on the outside now, I hear that a lot more, and people are like, "Well, what was your thoughts of Coach Garrett?" I was like, he cares more about those guys and those guys thriving, not just in football, but in life as much as anybody I've been around. So, I mean, I'm glad that it came out on the sideline, because I'll say this. There are times that when I was playing, I wish I was like, "You have every right just to lose your mind right now. Like, please just lose your mind."
Well, that was about the video that Caden just had up. You could see the one right before it showed Jason with the sunglasses, but you could see how he was beat red.
Yeah.
And Jason, I guess it's okay to tell this. I put it in my Dallas Morning News live chat today, but Jason's nickname as a player, at least with the Cowboys, was Red Ball.
Yeah.
Babe Laufenberg stuck him with that.
Red Ball, and then Big Red, they call him
Big Red,
too.
and then it's because Troy Aikman was 8 Ball because he wore number 8, and so Babe had dubbed Troy 8 Ball, so Jason was Red Ball because of the red hair, obviously. But yes, he was so mad. I mean, literally beat red. He was redder than his hair.
Yep.
And Carl Cheffers was the referee last night, and oh man, they probably were on the field an extra minute and a half to 2 minutes after the teams had cleared. The players were already in the locker room. So, hey, we're well over halfway through our time. And again, if you'd like to call, it's 888-855-2297. That's we have one, Caden? You said?
Yes, we have Joe.
Okay, Joe, what's your question?
Hey, how you doing?
Great.
I have actually just a couple of comments and a question. As far as the safety position, my concern is that the players that we have at the current safety position, they're not as quick, or they may lack the size when it comes to playing that position as far as toughness and the speed to keep up with the elite receivers around the league. The second question is our interior defensive line. I don't know if we have the personnel to keep up with the elite teams.
Now, Joe, are you including Antoine Woods and Tyrone Crawford in this because they were both injured and missed their second consecutive games? So
yes.
Okay.
And,
so you're saying full roster without injuries.
Yeah, I'm saying full roster, and trust me, I bleed blue and silver. I'm here in the greater Houston area, and they hate Dallas. And I get so sick of.
I'm from Galveston, man. So yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's I don't know. I'm looking at these games that they've gotten beaten in when when there's like low scoring and teams are able to run on the Cowboys. Like Kamara last night, I don't think he had 90 yards, but it was the yards that he had. They were like quality move the chain yards.
Mm-hmm.
He did convert some third downs, but he actually finished with 69 yards on 17 carries, so 4.1 average. But yeah, Joe, thanks for calling. And so actually let's talk about the safety position first, because I want to get back to an injury that we alluded to earlier, and that's Kayvon Frazier, who technically is backup safety behind Xavier Woods and Jeff Heath. But that pectoral injury that he suffered, it was late in the first quarter. He did not return to game action, and he wasn't going to get a lot of snaps on defense.
No.
But he and C.J. Goodwin are our flyers, our gunners on punt coverage, and C.J. is fantastic.
Yeah.
Kayvon, 2 years ago, I would have argued should have been in the Pro Bowl. He and Chris Jones, they flipped as the punter.
Yeah.
And Kayvon flying down, they flipped the field in so many games. Kayvon struggled through playing through some tweaks last year, not as strong last year. But this is a real blow to special teams. Could you talk to the importance of that?
The impact of special teams is huge. And so, I mean, you even look at how much we value special teams, that our starting safety is still the personal protector on punt. Jeff Heath, right? And he has not come off of that. It's a big deal. So if you've got a guy that can fill in adequately at safety and excel on special teams go down, that's a huge hole, because there aren't those bodies just out there everywhere, right? And that's a hard guy. Hard guy to find off the street, because teams really do value that specialist special teams player. And so Kayvon has been that guy for us for 3+ years now, right? Yeah, so he's into his fourth season. And so, I mean, he's a guy that we can count on to run down on punt as a gunner, make the tackle. He's a guy that runs down on kickoff. He's in on almost every single kickoff tackle that we have. And then also is a corner and plays on punt return, and is an effective hold up blocker on punt return.
Because he's a stout guy. He's not one of these light, skinny ones. He'd be more like strong safety up in the box than free safety playing back and being rangy.
Joe mentioned that our safeties are not that quick, or they're not that big, or they're not
Jeff
that
Heath
physical.
Is fast.
That's and Joe, hey, I appreciate your opinion. It's hard to tell on TV, right? Because you're looking at these safeties next to Leighton Vander Esch, who's all of 6'4", right?
Or Byron Jones and Chico was
right. And so you're looking at these guys, and so but they are not small guys. Like Jeff is 6'1", 6'2". That's a big safety. He's a big safety, and he's physical. I mean, Kayvon, same deal. Xavier Woods, very, very physical. Those guys will come down and they'll hit you. They're not afraid of it. To play in Rod Marinelli's defense, you have to be that type of safety. Yeah. And so I agree to disagree. I mean, I'm just going to be politically correct. And Joe, I appreciate the opinion, but I would say that that's probably not the case. Now, from a coverage standpoint, are those some question marks? I think, we've still got to answer some of those. Xavier Woods has shown that he can cover pretty well. Jeff is just an all-around good safety, right? He can come down, he can fill the run, he can cover deep. He covers deep third really well, and he covers ground as well as any safety in the league. I think you'd like to see more picks. I think you'd like to see more turnovers and some takeaways, but we have a good safety core. Like, we have a lot of guys that we can plug in, and if Jeff goes down, needs a breather, Kayvon goes in, you don't see us calling out Kayvon as a hole or a liability. Or Xavier goes down, another guy comes in. It's not, when they're out, it's not like, oh my gosh, we're exposed now.
Right.
Like back in the day, like if Ed Reed goes down, when he's down.
Yeah,
right?
That's a big loss. Well, Darian Thompson, who stepped in and started for Xavier Woods in Week 3 against the Dolphins, graded out very well.
Yeah.
And again, that's like a luxury. It's like having Cam Fleming stepping in at left tackle, or a guy like Christian Covington, who had been a starter for the Houston Texans, stepping in for Antoine Woods at defensive tackle, and we'll address defensive tackle in just a moment. But Darian Thompson did have to finish the game last night, so I invite Joe and everybody, all the other members of Cowboy Nation, we'll have an update on Xavier Woods after Coach Garrett's press conference, but he came off late in the fourth quarter and wasn't able to finish the game. Thompson went back in. We think he's going to be okay, but we'll know more going forward. But let's talk about defensive tackle, because I know Joe's not the only one thinking. And here we are, like, bagging on a defense that didn't allow a touchdown and 4 field goals. But we understand, we feel the same frustration. So how did you assess the defensive line play yesterday? And again, they were without 2 starters with Woods and Crawford.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more integrity in their rush lanes. Like Bridgewater had some time to slip out when he's not known as a running quarterback. And so he had the ability to move around and make some throws, some checkdowns that he probably shouldn't have. Obviously, Robert Quinn, great. It's great to see him come off like that. DeMarcus, obviously, he's always an issue, always applying pressure.
And DeMarcus was playing on a gimpy ankle last night, and I mean, he really, really toughed it out.
That's right. But from the interior perspective, Tyrone Crawford being gone, that hurts us, right? And that hurts from a strength aspect where he can push the pocket and he's pulling in tackles and alleviating some of the pressure for DeMarcus and Robert Quinn. But then, I mean, having Antoine Woods out too, that's more depth. And if you watch our defense and you watch Coach Marinelli and what he does, you see defensive linemen rolling out all the time. Yeah. They're constantly, because he wants those bodies to be fresh.
Yeah, you see Kerry Hyder in there, rotating in and give Malik Collins a blow, and then Malik can come back and make big plays like he did a couple plays ago there, and there's a good rush off the edge there, and that was Robert Quinn, of course. I like that dance just as much as the little pony thing from the week before.
That's right.
But great pressure up the middle for Hyder, who puts it into Jalen Smith there, and was that the biggest brain dead play by Teddy Bridgewater in the history of.
You just saw Drew Brees' face on the TV copy, just like.
The one thing you couldn't do. I know. A valiant effort by the defense. We're hopeful that Antoine. Don't know yet, but hopefully Tyrone Crawford and Antoine Woods may be able to work their way back in, at least in a limited limited fashion in practice this week. We hope, because it's getting that we got another call here. So, Caden, help us out here.
Hi, we got Ronnie on from New Jersey.
Oh, all the way from New Jersey. Thanks, Ronnie. What's your question?
How you guys doing?
Great.
My question is based more on the offensive game plan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for what I saw last night, it seemed like we reverted back to what we were last year, like more of a Jason Garrett more type of a offensive game plan, because there was like 9, 10 men in the box, and I just saw that they kept on trying to run. I mean, I heard something like when Tyler was talking earlier, he said something about more like to a fault. Jason's a little bit stubborn. You could have 10 men, we're going to do what we're going to do, and we're going to run through that line. I mean, isn't that what Kellen Moore's what he's here for? Like, change it up a little bit?
Instead of Scott Linehan? Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Ronnie.
Yeah, that's a good question. And here's the thing. When I say Coach Garrett's stubborn, I think that it's more of a mentality that he's trying to instill in the team, and that, listen, we're going to be confident in who we are and what our strength is. We know that we're a strong run team. We're built that way. Our offensive line, that's how we built them, is so that we can be effective and we can control the entire game by being able to run the ball. So with that being said, every time that a team puts 8 people in the box, if you just don't run the ball, then you don't have that mentality like, this is who we are, this is our personality, because you're not going to take away our strength just by putting bodies in the box. And so, yes, there needs to be some creativity, there needs to be some adjustments, because when they're putting that many people in the box, but there's different run schemes, there's different types of plays that you can run out of different personnels. One thing that Kellen does a good job of is he runs a lot of the same plays out of very different looks. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, it may look like, we're running the ball, but there's a very different approach to this. And so when they're putting that many people in the box, there's some things I think that, again, as a fan and totally a couch quarterback on this, there's some things that I would have liked to have seen, right? Like I would have liked to have seen a little bit more on the screen side. I think that we could have taken advantage of that with Cam Jordan coming up the field so hard. I think we could have. And
interior pass rush too,
right.
Like the last one we just saw.
That's right.
I mean, that was interior rush, and you never see that, or rarely see it, against Zach Martin and Travis Frederick.
But the challenge is too is we're light on receivers, and you don't think, okay, what do the receivers have to do with the run game? But they play a huge role in, one, pulling people out of the box because they respect the receivers that you have out there. But then two, also like blocking from the edge. And so I saw a lot of corners and a lot of safeties coming down and making tackles because our receivers were light on that aspect. So we're putting Jarwin in and we're putting Witt in, a lot of 12 personnel, where in the last couple of weeks we ran a lot more 11 personnel with 3 receivers, tight end, and a running back. And we just weren't as effective with that, I think, as we have been in the past. But I don't think the creativity went away. It just looked very different.
When your line's getting whipped on some of those plays. And it wasn't every play, but there was more up the middle for Dak to contend with than there has been in the previous games. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, before we go, let's hit a couple more of the questions here. So go ahead.
Yeah, New York, Mike. So this is along the same lines. But
so we've heard from New Jersey and New York today. Okay. Good.
Come on, guys. Love it. What did you guys think of Kellen Moore's play calling? Didn't seem as creative as the first 3 games. Same point, right? Like you can't just like draw up plays and just run whatever you want against whatever they show you, right? When the defense shows you certain things and certain tendencies, you've got to be able to account for that. And although we don't see, the end arounds or the fly sweeps or, these creative things that we expect of Kellen Moore because he's a Boise State guy, like the creativity comes from a lot of different aspects. Like, how are we moving guys? How are we showing if we've got man coverage or not? What do our route progressions look? Who are we going to attack? When we run the ball, what do our blocking schemes look like? How are we going to account for those guys? A lot of the things that we did early on in the game that were successful as we were moving the ball, unfortunately, we lost the ball. But just because it's not so clear as to these like wild, like Sean McVay plays, doesn't mean that he wasn't being creative. And so there's a lot
that goes in.
Exactly.
It's execution. And you can see the one there that the ball was just slightly behind Randall Cobb. Now Randall will be the first to say, I need to catch that. But there were just some passes that were off. And that one wasn't necessarily so much a pass rush there, but just a little off. And then the one that you saw earlier where Amari Cooper one-on-one, Lattimore made a good play. Yeah. You got to win it, but it goes back to is he totally healthy on that ankle? Let's do a couple more questions before we go. This is Josh from Tyler, Texas. What's it like on the ride home with the team after such a disappointing loss? Well, the good news, Josh, is last night we were in the air for less than an hour because it was New Orleans. Yeah. But I guess we got home. We actually were a little early, got home about 1:50 in the morning or so, just before 2 a.m. But Tyler, you left too soon because now we have these big American Airlines 777s.
What?
Yeah, they're huge. And
so I missed the star.
You missed the star.
And I missed the good planes.
Well, so the coaches and executives are up in first class, but there's these awesome I don't know, it's like ultimate. Yeah, the ones that are the beds. So the way that they do it is the players with the most tenure.
Yep.
So it's like, LP Ladisar, he has the second most tenure on the team behind Jason Witten. Mm-hmm. So he's got one of the beds. Dak, Zeke, Travis Frederick, guys like that.
Yeah.
Jeff Heath, they get the beds. And then you have the media, some staffers, media, and then the rest of the team is in the back of the plane, what would be coach.
Yeah.
I know the coaches are in first class, but the players are in coach. No, coach section. But they get seats in between them. Mm-hmm. But it's still, there's not a lot of leg room for these big guys. But anyway, obviously it's pretty somber on a ride home. But it's not the party that and I shouldn't say party because that has certain connotations.
It's alive. It's
after
not
a win,
it's alive. That's for sure.
Yeah. Back in the old days from the 90s, there'd be card games going.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just talking about the media section. Yeah. No, but everything was not as sequestered and it was just out there and stuff like that.
I'll say this. There's a lot more film watching on the way home after a loss because you're trying to prepare yourself for the next day's meeting.
Yeah.
When you come in and when you're about to get ripped.
Well, and when you say that, it's the they do the Microsoft Surface tablets. I can tell you that the coaches, as they're leaving the locker room, go through the security, get on the bus, Robert Blackwell and his video crew are handing them the Surface tablets, and it's already got the plays where they can just go through. Defensive coaches get the defensive plays, offensive, and so on and so on, special teams. And they have already gone through all the plays in the game, probably a couple, at least once before they even get on the plane. Yeah. So it's a lot. Technology has changed things.
They usually have watched the game 2 times through by the time they get off of the plane.
Wow.
Most of the time.
I believe it.
Yeah, most of the times they'll do a lot of their grading and all that before they even get off the plane, which it helps because they're back in the facility first thing in the morning. So they may be able to see their family first thing in the morning after a late game, and then they're in. But it is the ride home is not fun. Especially if you're making that cross country flight, that's awful.
Seattle's usually the worst. That's about 4.5 hours, and invariably it's always a late game. It's at least a 3:25 because it's Pacific Coast, which would be 1:25 their time, or 1 p.m. Pacific. Mm-hmm. But anyway, when there's a Monday night game or a Sunday night game, the team usually gets in. We get in about 4:30 in the morning because it's whether it's from New York or Philly or LA or something like that. One more question that I want to fit in because I want to give a pat on the back to a couple of radio crew members. This is Gary in Friendswood, Texas. Hey, Christy, another nice job by the radio crew, but where was Brad Sham? Will he be back for the Packers game on Sunday? The answer is yes, Brad will be back, and he was observing Rosh Hashanah. So again, Happy New Year to Brad. But because the game was a Sunday night football game and after sundown, Brad he stayed at home and he didn't broadcast because you're not supposed to work after sundown in his faith. And so he will be back for the Packer game, but I just want to give a shout out to Ted Emmerich, who filled in for Brad play-by-play, and also Brandon, who was the spotter, filling in for Sam and Jake. But Ted Emmerich he does a lot of Westwood One. He does Olympics. I'm sure you've heard of college football, college basketball. But Teddy grew up in Dallas, and he is the son of Roger Emmerich. So if you've been to a Cowboy game in the past several years, you've heard Roger's voice, booming voice, as the PA announcer for Dallas Cowboys games. And Roger passed in the spring, and he's a longtime sports voice in Dallas radio. And Teddy's his son. I've known him since he's like 10 years old, and now he's big-time announcer. So thanks for stepping down and slumming with Cowboys radio. But thank you, Teddy. You did a wonderful job. And same thing with you, Brandon. So final thoughts heading into a week where you got to observe the 24-hour rule, win or lose. Yeah. So you got to decompress and you got to take a step back and you got to breathe. But then you've got to be very critical. You have to, as you should after a win as well. I think, like Bill Belichick is notorious for, I really love wins and coaching hard on that, but losses, there's even more to learn, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot to learn. There's no excuse in this game because it's 100% performance based. How well do you execute on Sundays? Because that's all that matters. There's a lot of things that did not go our way in the game, but we have to own up to that and we have to correct those mistakes. There's a lot out there. I would say this though. I think if you're a fan and you're listening, if you're a fan of the Cowboys and you're listening to this right now, don't be discouraged. This is a great team and can accomplish a lot of really, really good things. There's a lot of things I liked about that team. The fight never quit. Never. And so, that one is that alone, you should be proud of the guys because the character of this team is the right character that we want, right? And so don't panic. Don't write off the season. We got back-to-back really tough games. I mean, Green Bay is a really good team. They've always given us issues, and so we need to show up and we need to fix a lot of those mistakes. Hopefully, we can get healthier this week, and the guys that they got hurt in the game, they can bounce back and be there ready to go. But it's going to be a long week. Guys are going to take it serious, but don't panic. It's early. Sometimes a loss right now is the best time to take a loss as opposed to later in the season. Sure. And so we can rebuild and we'll be fine. This is a good team, like I said, very talented, and we're going to do some good things. Yeah, well, we thank everyone for their questions via Twitter, for calling in, Ronnie and Joe from all over the country. And we invite you to check in with DallasCowboys.com because, as you mentioned, with the injuries, we'll have updates on Tyron Smith and Xavier Woods and Kayvon Frazier later this evening and as the week goes on. So for Tyler Klutz and for Brad Sham, who'll be back next week, and for our producer, Caden Gates, I am Christy Scales, and thank you so much for tuning in.
This has been a production of DallasCowboys.com and the Dallas Cowboys Football Club.
How about this, Cowboys? Yeah!